The 5 most dangerous and evil women in the Bible. The Bible is filled with stories of women who made poor choices, defied God's commandments, and inflicted harm upon others. Yet, some stand out for their extreme wickedness and the incredible dangers they pose to God's people. These women are notorious for their cruelty, their manipulation, and their disregard for righteousness. Today, we're diving into the lives of 5 such women who committed unimaginable evil acts against the innocent and against God's will. From the least to the most dangerous, let's unravel these dark tales one by one. Number 5. Potiphar's wife. In the land of ancient Egypt, during a time when Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, was sold into slavery by his own brothers out of jealousy, a disturbing saga was unfolding within the walls of Potiphar's household. Potiphar was a powerful man, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the royal guard, entrusting Joseph with full responsibility over his estate due to Joseph's remarkable abilities and the undeniable favor of God upon him. Potiphar's wife, however, harbored more sinister intentions. Driven by lust and an insatiable craving for control, she became infatuated with Joseph. The Bible paints a vivid picture of her relentless attempts to seduce him. She saw Joseph not as a servant but as an object to possess, and she went to great lengths to manipulate him into her bed. As described in Genesis 39 verses 7 to 10, after some time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. Joseph responded firmly, expressing his loyalty to both Potiphar and God, insisting, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Her advances grew bolder with each passing day, but Joseph never faltered. Filled with rage and desperation, Potiphar's wife resorted to deception. One fateful day, when the house was empty, she seized Joseph by his cloak, demanding that he submit to her desires. His response? To run. He fled, leaving his garment behind. Humiliated and seething with fury, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of assault, holding the torn garment as evidence. Genesis 39 verses 11 to 18 details the deception. When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Potiphar, believing his wife, had Joseph thrown into prison, unaware of the real truth and the injustices at play. Potiphar's wife, in her wickedness, set in motion a series of events that would haunt an innocent man. Though Joseph suffered, God's plan was far from thwarted. Behind bars, God's favor rested on Joseph, and he found favor even with the prison warden. Eventually, this led to Joseph's rise in position once more, ultimately fulfilling a divine purpose that was bigger than his torment. Genesis 39 verses 21 to 23 reminds us, "The Lord was with Joseph. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden." What began as an act of spite became the backdrop for God's greater plan for Joseph's destiny. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything under Joseph's charge, for the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Genesis 39 verse 23. Joseph's time in prison, though marked by injustice and suffering, was not in vain. Far from it. This dark chapter in his life would set the stage for his extraordinary rise to power. It was within the cold, stone walls of the prison that Joseph's God-given gifts would come to light, first through interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, leading to his pivotal moment, interpreting Pharaoh's dreams himself. This divine intervention catapulted Joseph into a position of unimaginable power, second only to Pharaoh in all of Egypt, where he oversaw preparations for the devastating famine that was to come. Genesis 41. Potiphar's wife may have caused Joseph suffering, but in the grand narrative of God's plan, her malice ultimately positioned Joseph to save many, his own family included, when famine gripped the land. Though Potiphar's wife seemingly faced no direct retribution for her treachery, her actions were still part of the divine orchestration that revealed God's ultimate will. Even today, we see echoes of Potiphar's wife's legacy. false accusations that have left an indelible mark on history. Yet, as this story reveals, God can transform even the darkest of human actions into a foundation for His greater purpose and glory. Number 4. Delilah. Some people commit evil out of ignorance, but others, like Delilah, not only commit evil, they thrive in it. Delilah's tale unfolds during a chaotic period in Israel's history, the era of the Judges, when Israel was embroiled in constant conflict with their enemies, especially the mighty Philistines. Despite living in the heart of Philistine territory, the Bible leaves much about Delilah's background vague. What we do know, however, is that she aligned herself with Israel's enemies. Her actions speak volumes about where her true allegiance lay. Delilah is most famous for her role in the tragic downfall of Samson, a man whose unparalleled physical strength was a direct gift from God. The Philistine rulers, desperate to see this champion of Israel defeated, saw in Delilah the perfect tool to destroy Samson. They offered her an enormous bribe, 1,100 pieces of silver from each of the Philistine lords, a sum too great for Delilah to ignore. Driven by greed and perhaps even a thirst for revenge against her own people, she agreed to their sinister plan, Judges 16 verse 5. Delilah's manipulation of Samson was relentless. Over and over again, she coerced him into revealing the secret of his strength, using every weapon in her arsenal, tears, honeyed words, and a tenderness designed to wear him down. After several false attempts, she finally succeeded in breaking him. Judges 16 verses 16 to 17 describes the moment. She pressed him day after day with her words, until he was sick to death of it. Finally, he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite set apart to God since birth. If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me, and I'll become as weak as any other man." Samson's vulnerability was her moment of triumph. With a sense of cold calculation, Delilah lured him into a false sense of security, allowing him to fall asleep in her lap. Then, in a deliberate act of betrayal, she called for a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair, severing the covenant between Samson and God. With his strength gone, Samson was quickly captured by the Philistines. They gouged out his eyes, humiliating him, and threw him into a prison in Gaza, where he was forced to grind grain. An utter disgrace for Israel's mightiest judge, Judges 16 verse 21. In exchange for her treachery, Delilah was richly rewarded by the Philistines, her personal greed now written into the pages of history. But even in his lowest moments, Samson's fate was not sealed. As his hair began to grow back, so too did his strength, a symbol of God's ever-present power, even in the face of betrayal. At the Philistine festival in the temple of Dagon, Samson prayed to God, and in one final, dramatic act, his strength returned, just long enough to defeat the Philistines and bring glory to God, albeit at the cost of his own life. Samson's request was granted by God, and in one final act of defiance and divine justice, he pulled down the temple pillars, causing the structure to collapse. With it, Samson's strength returned, not just to avenge his suffering, but to strike a devastating blow to the Philistines, Judges 16 verses 28 to 30. In that moment, Samson's power overpowered the structure, and with his own life, many of the Philistine leaders perished alongside him. His sacrifice wasn't in vain. It symbolized the immense power of God even in the darkest hours. Though Delilah was never mentioned again after Samson's tragic end, her pivotal role can never be overlooked. It's her actions that led to his capture, his humiliation, and ultimately, his final triumphant act against the Philistines. Delilah's story embodies the corruptive forces of betrayal, deceit, and greed. Forces that only destroy lives and fortify enemies against God's chosen people. The legacy she left behind is one of devastation, manipulation, and self-interest, a legacy that has influenced destructive behavior ever since. Number 3. Herodias. One of the darkest, most heart-wrenching stories in the Bible is that of Herodias, a woman whose unchecked ambition and grudge turned into a ruthless thirst for revenge. Herodias, part of the influential Herodian dynasty, was initially married to Herod Philip, her half-uncle. But the allure of political power pushed Herodias to abandon him, leaving behind the bonds of marital loyalty to marry his half-brother, Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. Her marriage to Antipas was seen as scandalous, an unlawful union, according to Jewish law, and one that scandalized the entire region. Herodias harbored deep animosity toward John the Baptist, whose condemnation of her marriage left her humiliated and enraged. John, a revered prophet known for his boldness and uncompromising adherence to God's truth, openly declared that Herod Antipas's marriage to her was sinful, Mark 6 verses 18 to 19. His words were a piercing rebuke, one that Herodias could not let go unpunished. The opportunity for vengeance came during the birthday celebration of Herod Antipas, where Herodias manipulated her own daughter, Salome, into dancing for the guests. Salome's dance enchanted King Herod, and in his drunken delight, he promised to give her anything her heart desired, even half of his kingdom, Mark 6 verses 22 to 23. But this was not a gift from a mother to her daughter. It was a carefully orchestrated plot. Instructed by Herodias, Salome asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter, a gruesome demand that would set the stage for tragedy, Mark 6 verses 24 to 25. Reluctantly, despite his respect for John, Herod felt bound to his oath and ordered the immediate execution of the prophet, Mark 6 verses 26 to 27. What followed was horrifying. John was beheaded in prison, and his severed head was presented to Salome, who then handed it over to her mother, Herodias, Mark 6 verses 27 to 28. This grisly act of vengeance silenced John, but it spoke volumes about Herodias's unquenchable thirst for revenge. The Bible doesn't provide immediate consequences for her actions, but Herodias's life didn't remain untarnished. Herod Antipas's political fortunes were about to take a drastic turn. He was exiled to Gaul, modern-day France, by the Roman Emperor Caligula after accusations of disloyalty and conspiracy. Herodias's story serves as a chilling reminder of the devastating power of unchecked wrath and how personal grudges, when left to fester, can lead a person down a destructive and treacherous path. Her destructive anger against John the Baptist ultimately led not just to the loss of a prophet's life, but also to the downfall of Herod Antipas, forever tying her name to the very epitome of betrayal and vengeance. Herodias's story intertwines with dark themes of manipulation, revenge, and the corrosive effects of power. Her calculated use of her own daughter, Salome, as a pawn in her vengeful scheme reveals the depths of her treachery. With cold precision, she orchestrated the death of John the Baptist, all to silence a righteous man who dared to speak out against her marriage. While the Bible doesn't reveal the end of Herodias's life, her legacy remains one of notorious ambition and moral degradation, forever linked to a woman who used power not to uplift, but to destroy. Her actions serve as a stark warning about the dangers of yielding to vengeful desires and the consequences of living a life shaped by greed and anger. Number 2. Athaliah. Athaliah's bloodline was one steeped in sin, bloodshed, and power-grabbing, born to King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel, notorious figures known for their deep commitment to idolatry and ruthless rule. Married to Jehoram, the king of Judah, Athaliah's reign represented a dangerous political alliance between the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Yet, her thirst for power ran deeper, lurking beneath the surface even during her husband's and later her son's reign. Her true nature revealed itself in a ruthless thirst for dominion. After the tragic and sudden death of her son, Ahaziah, Athaliah took the throne for herself, determined to consolidate her power. In an unfathomable act of bloodshed, she ordered the slaughter of anyone who could challenge her rule, the royal family, including even her own grandchildren. The Bible recounts this horrifying massacre with chilling detail in 2 Kings 11 verses 1 to 3. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram and sister of Ahaziah, took Joash the son of Ahaziah and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus, they hid him from Athaliah, so that he was not put to death. Herodias' ambition paled in comparison to the devastation Athaliah sought to wreak. In her unrelenting pursuit of power, Athaliah destroyed everyone around her, without mercy or regard for bloodlines. But in an unexpected twist of fate, Jehosheba, Athaliah's own daughter, courageously saved Joash, her nephew. This tiny act of rebellion proved to be the crucial turning point. For 6 years, young Joash was hidden in the temple of the Lord, safe from his grandmother's vengeful hand, preserving the Davidic line, which Athaliah sought to obliterate. While she reigned unchecked for 6 years, continuing to spread the idol worship that her parents had instilled in her, the people of Judah quietly suffered. Her tyrannical rule sparked an inevitable uprising. The high priest Jehoiada led a calculated revolt, rallying the temple guards and military leaders against her. When Joash was finally revealed to the people at the age of 7, he was hailed as the rightful king of Judah, and the joyous rebellion against Athaliah's blood-stained rule erupted. The people, tired of oppression, stood behind Joash, and the day of reckoning came for the tyrant. 2 Kings 11 verses 12 to 16 describes the dramatic confrontation that finally brought Athaliah's reign to an end. Then he brought out the king's son and put the crown on him, and gave him the testimony. And they proclaimed him king and anointed him, and they clapped their hands and said, "Long live the king!" When Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she went into the house of the Lord to the people. And when she looked, there was the king standing by the pillar, according to the custom, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason! Treason!" Then Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains who were set over the army, "Bring her out between the ranks, and put to death with the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest said, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." So they laid hands on her, and she went through the horses' entrance to the king's house, and there she was put to death. The scene that unfolds is nothing short of cinematic. Athaliah, hearing the cries of jubilation, rushes to the temple to find Joash crowned as king, with the people's jubilation ringing in her ears. Torn with outrage, she cries, "Treason!" But her calls for loyalty are swiftly drowned out by the very forces she had once commanded. The high priest Jehoiada's clever coup results in her own downfall. Her bloodied hands had driven her to an inevitable fate, execution at the hands of her own guards, a tragic end that obliterated her family's hold over Judah. Her reign had been a reign of terror, killing heirs, manipulating the throne, and leading the nation into sin. But through the bold acts of her daughter and the righteous priesthood, Judah was delivered from her tyranny. Her death did not just end her power. It paved the way for the rightful king to return, re-establishing God's covenant with his people. Number 1. Jezebel. If you think Athaliah's tyranny was fierce, wait until you hear the legendary evil of Jezebel. She was a force of nature, driven by her fervent devotion to Baal, the Canaanite god, and a ruthlessness that struck fear into the hearts of even kings. Daughter of Ethbaal, king of Sidon and high priest of Astarte, Jezebel's marriage to Ahab, king of Israel, wasn't merely one of convenience. It was a political and religious bloodline merger that plunged Israel into a whirlpool of idolatry and apostasy. From the very moment she stepped into the palace, Jezebel's presence became a dark influence on Israel. Her belief in Baal was so powerful that she actively undermined the worship of Yahweh, seeking to completely eradicate it by persuading the people, and her own husband, to abandon their God. Her actions were not just about worship. They were about power, aligning Israel's religious practices with her homeland's agenda and forging a unified front of the world's most destructive religions. She ordered the construction of altars and temples to Baal, demanding allegiance from the nation and turning their hearts away from God. This story of unrelenting idolatry paints Jezebel as a symbol of absolute evil ambition. Her cruelty was not limited to religion. She would use any means to achieve her goals. Her greatest infamy comes in her cold, calculating murder of Naboth, a righteous man with a vineyard coveted by Ahab. Driven by greed, Jezebel orchestrated his death through a series of lies and false accusations, and Naboth was stoned to death. 1 Kings 21. Her darkness was manifest in bloodshed, ensuring that the king got his prize. Jezebel's cunning and ruthless efficiency tore through the fabric of Israel's spiritual purity, leaving destruction in her wake. When Naboth refused to sell his vineyard to King Ahab, Jezebel unleashed a ruthless, twisted scheme. In a move that mirrored her manipulative tactics, she forged letters in Ahab's name, commanding the elders and nobles of Naboth's town to falsely accuse him of blasphemy and treason. The result was a horrific miscarriage of justice. Naboth was stoned to death, and the vineyard was immediately seized by Ahab, his blood on Jezebel's hands. 1 Kings 21 verses 7 to 16. This heinous act demonstrated Jezebel's utter disregard for human life, as she was willing to use falsehoods, corruption, and murder to gain power. In the face of her treacherous rule, one man dared to stand against Jezebel, Elijah. Known for his fierce dedication to God, Elijah faced Jezebel's wrath after his dramatic victory on Mount Carmel, where he exposed the impotence of Baal and executed her false prophets. Furious and humiliated, Jezebel sent a threatening message to Elijah, swearing to kill him. Elijah was forced to flee, an exile from a woman who threatened not just his life but the very truth he championed. 1 Kings 19 verses 1 to 2. But her tyranny did not end with Elijah. Jezebel's heart was cold. In an incessant drive to annihilate the true prophets of Yahweh, she began ordering massacres, rooting out anyone who remained loyal to Israel's God. The persecution was so intense that Obadiah, a servant of the Lord, secretly hid 100 prophets in caves to protect them from her bloodthirsty pursuit. 1 Kings 18 verse 4. Her reign of fear cut deep into the heart of Israel, leaving victims and suffering in its wake. Jezebel's actions never went unpunished. The prophet Elijah had foretold her doom, declaring that dogs would devour her body by the wall of Jezreel, a prophecy that would prove to be as haunting as it was prophetic. 1 Kings 21 verse 23, divine retribution was inevitable. Her tragic demise occurred when Jehu, anointed by Elisha to bring an end to Ahab's wicked dynasty, arrived in Jezreel. In a final act of defiance, Jezebel adorned herself in royal attire and taunted Jehu from a window. But her last stand was short-lived. Jehu ordered her to be thrown down, and she was trampled underfoot by Jehu's horses. Her body was left to be devoured by dogs, just as Elijah had prophesied, fulfilling divine justice in a graphic and brutal act. All that remained were her skull, feet, and hands. 2 Kings 9 verses 30 to 37. Jezebel's name has become a symbol of the deepest wickedness and idol worship, representing a woman whose ambition knew no bounds and whose sins led to unspeakable suffering. Her legacy stands as a powerful warning against leading others away from God. She epitomized treachery, immorality, and the unstoppable force of divine judgment, a stark reminder that no amount of earthly power can escape God's justice. The lives of these women stand as powerful and sobering cautionary tales of the dangers of unchecked ambition, deceit, and idolatry. Each of their stories serves as a vivid illustration of the grave consequences that arise when we stray from moral integrity and faithfulness to God. Let us learn from their failures and choose righteousness in our own lives. By embracing humility, integrity, and unwavering devotion to God, we can avoid walking down the destructive paths they once took. Their stories remind us of the destructive power of sin and how easily one can be led astray. Instead, may we be inspired to honor God with our choices, cultivating lives filled with love, justice, faith, and goodness. Living with divine favor and fulfilling His purpose for our lives is the reward of walking in the path of righteousness. Thank you for watching. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share this video with others. God bless you. Amen.